happy to welcome Mike Rogers back to the program this week. I've also got audio from South Carolina District 5 Congressman Mike Mulvaney. We also have Ann Corcoran, editor of Refugee Resettlement Watch. Kimberly Morin joins us from the Second Amendment Foundation's 31st Annual Gun Rights Policy Conference in Tampa, Florida. And we've got John Zmirack, senior editor of Stream.org and the author of the book Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism. That all starts right after this.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
John Zmirack, the senior editor of Stream.org and the author of the new book, Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism. John, welcome back, and I'm glad the book's out because we talked about the book briefly a few visits ago.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited about it. I'm really looking forward to people learning a little bit more about how the Democratic Party and some of our bishops and sometimes our Pope have hijacked elements of Catholic teaching to try to promote big government, open borders, broken budgets, and a wide variety of things that really are not in any way called for by the Bible or the traditions of the Church or Christian ethics.
Well, we are actually going to talk about a different kind of hijacking. In the last few days, there has been a recent spate of terror attacks, and we've learned that bombings aren't necessarily bombings, and terror attacks aren't necessarily terrorism. It's an exciting world we live in.
Yeah, it is. You know what? And men aren't necessarily men, and women aren't necessarily women, but anything is racist if they say it is.
True.
It really is like, if you've ever read Alice in Wonderland, they have the character Humpty Dumpty, who says each word means precisely what I mean it to at any given moment, because the key is who's in charge. And if I'm in charge, I get to define what words mean, and that's power. And, of course, we see that more vividly in Orwell's 1984, where the redefinition of language is a tool of state control. And political correctness is all about creating a newspeak where you're not allowed, or even in a sense able, to tell the truth about politics because the language has been corrupted. And if you remember Orwell's famous essay, Politics in the English Language, he says that totalitarians, and generally people who have power and want more power, try to corrupt the very instruments of discourse, language, so that they can hold on to that power. And you can see that all the way back with Plato, where Socrates is debating the sophists, and the sophists are constantly trying to corrupt language so that it can serve their ends, and Socrates is insisting that words actually mean something.
Well, in the land of terrorism, one of the things that people are talking about, and the government wants to change the words, or they want to change the conversation, or more specifically, they just want to bring in more refugees or more immigrants or whatever, for the sole purpose, it appears, of completely changing our culture. And two of the towns where there is a lot of refugee resettlement going on happen to be St. Cloud, Minnesota, and Elizabethtown, New Jersey, where we had two terrorist attacks this weekend.
Well, surprise, surprise. I just read today a quote from a counterterrorism expert. His name is Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer. He has estimated that up to 15% of Muslim immigrants who are labeled refugees from the country of Syria have links to ISIS. 15% of these so-called refugees are actually connected to ISIS's terrorism. First of all, let's be precise about our language. These are not refugees. The moment these people left Syria and made it to what international law calls the first safe country, be it Turkey or Jordan, they stopped being refugees. They are safe now in a Muslim country where they belong and where they should stay. Do you know how many refugees Saudi Arabia has taken? It is actually zero. Do you know what, though? They're spending tens of millions of dollars doing? Building mosques in Germany, building Islamic schools in France. They are using the war in Syria as a means to colonize Europe and America the same way we colonized the Indians. So if we want to end up like the Cherokees and the Apaches, we can keep on doing what we're doing. We can elect Hillary Clinton, and maybe someday the Muslims will let us have casinos and bars on our little Christian reservations in the Black Hills of South Dakota.
I was kind of hoping we could get to Texas. Maybe we could save Texas. That's pretty big. There's a lot of room there.
I have a feeling Texas will be, and I'm living there now.
Yeah.
I moved from New Hampshire to New York and then back to Texas because I can't take these state and local income taxes. So I'm living in a free state, in a free state, Texas. And yeah, I think Texas will eventually develop its own nuclear deterrent and go independent rather than be part of the Islamic State that Hillary Clinton and the Muslim Brotherhood and Huma Baden are trying to build.
All right, so the Obama administration has announced that it plans to bring in another 110,000 refugees beginning on October 1st, and Kurt Lewis, the director of the Sacramento Field Office for World Relief, said probably 20,000 to 30,000 of those refugees are going to be from Syria.
And you know how many of them will be Christian? Less than 1%.
Oh, there will be some
Christians?
Where,
I think they don't have perfect filters, so they can't keep them all out.
Sneak in.
But there are virtually no safe places for Arab Christians. Lebanon is not even a safe place for them anymore. Syria used to be a safe place for them before we started helping these so-called moderate Muslim rebels. There is no safe place for Arab Christians, but we're not taking them. There are tons of safe places for Sunni Muslims, and we're taking them. Here's another interesting statistic. According to the Pew Report, 1 in 5 Muslims living in America believe that suicide bombings in defense of Islam can sometimes be justified. 1 in 5. If you go globally, that rises to 1 in 4. So 20% of Muslims already in America think suicide bombing is sometimes justified in protecting Islam. Well, what do they mean by protecting Islam? From blasphemy? From cartoons of Muhammad, from people criticizing their religion? These people are the ones who take Islam seriously. Okay, the good, so-called good Muslims have no place in a constitutional republic. The ones who drink wine and eat pork chops and go to belly dancers and don't take their religion seriously can be perfectly good neighbors. So really, the only good Muslim is a bad Muslim.
So I was poking around looking for anything that you'd written on immigration, and I found an August 25th article on Donald Trump, actually, in which you state, importing more clients for nanny-state socialist programs, many of them with desperate needs that only the federal government can possibly hope to solve, and shipping in trainloads of future Democrat voters who will be herded by the leaders of their communities to back the party of lavish welfare, transgender tyranny, and Planned Parenthood. Now, I bring up those remarks that you made because last Friday, we, the 603 Alliance, of which I am a member, premiered Trevor Loudon's The Enemies Within movie, which is an awesome movie. The DVD becomes available this Thursday. You should watch it because there's a huge section on the Islamic invasion. It's really great stuff. It's really
I'm glad to hear that. We have to get the word out. And that's another reason the Democrats want to bring in Muslims, because the more security threats there are, the more pretext they have to take away our guns and take away our civil liberties. So it's a perfect win for them. The more people on welfare, more excuses to grab our guns, more voters for the Democrats. There is literally no downside for this for the Democrats, unless, some of them might be patriotic Americans. But I think that number is shrinking.
Well, the first part of the movie, he talks about, his big thing was communists and socialism and their invasion of Western democracies. And then all the members of Congress and the Senate who have ties to these groups. And he also names all the senators and congressmen who have ties to Islamic money, the front groups, the Muslim Brotherhood groups. He goes to great length to mention them all. So it's well worth watching. It ties into our conversation today. And people need to understand that whether you buy into the communism or the socialism or the Islamism or whatever, the immigration problem is a problem. If 10 or 20 million illegal immigrants are immediately turned into registered voters, 75% of those people are going to vote Democrat. And in the last presidential election, Romney only lost by a few million votes. So we're talking permanent Democrat state, and then everything John has just told you about transgenderism and about everything. That's all going to be on the books. They're just going to ram it all through.
That's right. I mean, I was not and I'm not a huge fan of Donald Trump, but compared to Hillary Clinton, oh my God. I told people I would vote for a dead moose tied to a car hood to stop Hillary Clinton. I even made a little graphic of a dead moose tied to a car hood that said, "Make America Great Again." Hillary Clinton has got to be stopped. Has got to be stopped. She is one of the most corrupt, power-hungry, secretive, conspiratorial weirdos ever to run for office in American history. And she makes Richard Nixon look like Mr. Rogers. And given her ties to Saudi Arabia and the Muslim Brotherhood and the radical immigration agenda she supports, it really is a no-brainer. This is a Flight 93 election.
Oh, yeah, it is. That was a great article. Wish we had time for that. All right, so stream.org.
Stream.org and the Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism, now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
All right, John, thanks so much for taking a few minutes
to talk
with me. You have a great night.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Mike Mulvaney is the congressman from the 5th District in South Carolina, and during a committee hearing in which they were questioning the CEO of Mylan Pharmaceuticals, he made some excellent observations about things they ought to be talking about instead of basically interviewing her and asking her all sorts of questions. It was well worth our time for posting at GraniteRock.com, and I think it's certainly worth your time here in the podcast. Please give it a listen.
Because I got to tell you, as someone who considers himself to be a free market Republican, part of me has been uncomfortable with where some of this hearing has gone. I wish we were talking, instead of what we've been talking about why Mylan can charge $600 for this or $300 for a generic or whatever. Because I think that would be a really good discussion about why this same exact product costs between $100 and $150 in Europe. The same exact thing from the same exact manufacturer costs $100 to $150 in Europe. In fact, I think you can get it over the counter in Europe for $75. One of the reasons, by the way, is that there's 9 different people making the stuff in Europe. Because it's easier to get drugs approved in Europe, Mr. Throckmorton, than it is here. I heard you talk today about this new 10-month plan, and you keep telling us, and it's sort of, well, we have a 10-month plan that starts October 1st, which makes you wonder how long did it really take before this became a big national deal. My guess is it takes a long time to get this stuff approved. And one of the reasons they can charge $300 or $600 is because it's too hard to get new products approved in this country. My understanding is that an EpiPen competitor would be even more difficult to get stuff approved because it's both a drug and a delivery device. By the way, for those of you, when this hasn't come up, the stuff doesn't cost anything. This is one of the oldest chemicals that we use. I think the stuff is more than 100 years old, and on the internet it says it costs between like 10 cents and 95 cents a vial for the stuff. It's a completely generic price. It's adrenaline. It's really easy to make the stuff and really easy to get the stuff. But for some reason in this country, there's really only one provider. So if you can really charge $600 for it and people will pay for it, why aren't more people rushing in to make the stuff so that they can get a piece of this huge market? Because it's too hard to get the darn stuff approved. And that's what I wish we were talking about. Ms. Bresch, I wish we could talk about what you talked about in your CNBC article about how crazy the pricing is. Because it is bizarre. And we buy stuff in the healthcare market in ways that we don't buy anywhere else. The reason that this same product is more expensive every single year, when everything else in this room gets less expensive every year, is because it's in the healthcare market, which doesn't function properly. And we could have talked about that and how hard it is to figure out how much stuff costs and the 5 and 6 people that touch it between the time it comes out of your product and gets in the hands of the customer. We didn't talk about that. Instead, we talked about your profit margins with people who have no clue what that means. We talked about distribution facilities. We talked about costs of goods sold. We talk about board meetings. We talk about your salary. We talk about a bunch of stuff that tries to make a lot of us look really good. Somebody in my own party said that there's no way you could really earn $18 million a year. That bothers me, okay? And I'm not comfortable with that. But at the same time, Ms. Bresch, and I've had this conversation with other people who've sat in that same chair, you get what you deserve. Not because you're a bad person, not because you're charging too much or too little for a drug. Nobody in here has any clue as to whether or not you're charging too much or too little. We don't like it, we know that, but we don't understand the cost. We don't understand the distribution system. We don't understand how healthcare products get priced and sold and distributed. I'll tell you what we do know, though, is that you've been in these hallways to ask us to make people buy your stuff. In fact, I think there's laws in 11 states now that require schools to have epinephrine in some immediately deliverable fashion. You've lobbied us to make the taxpayer buy your stuff. At the federal level, we passed the law here. We did it, by the way. I was here when we did it. Everybody was here when we did it. We did it in 2013. It went by voice vote, one of those magical things that happens when we're not on the floor. The White House called it the EpiPen bill. And it gave this wonderful financial incentive to all of our schools to have this product in the schools. My guess is that didn't happen by magic. It may have happened because your mother works for the State School Boards Association, whatever the group is. It may happen because your dad is a U.S. Senator. But you came and you asked the government to get in your business. So here we are today. And I was as uncomfortable with some of these questions as you were. I'm certain sitting over there. But I have to defend both my Republican and Democratic colleagues because you've asked for it. So I guess this is my message. If you want to come into Washington, if you want to come to the state capitals and lobby us to make us buy your stuff, this is what you get. You get a level of scrutiny and a level of treatment that would ordinarily curl my hair, but you asked for it. I wish it weren't like that. I wish you could go off and make your stuff, and I wish the market functioned, and I wish you didn't get government involved, but that's not the world we live in. And since it is, I have to defend every single question that was asked of you today, and I wish I had questions of my own, and I do, but I've only got 5 seconds left, so I'm not going to get a chance to ask. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, my next guest is the editor of Refugee Resettlement Watch. Ann Corcoran, welcome back to the program.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be back.
All right, well, a lot of things going on this topic, particularly after last Saturday. There was a 22-year-old Somali American, Tahira Dawn, who went on a knifing rampage at a mall in St. Cloud, Minnesota. What do we know about him at this point, and what can you tell us about the history of refugee resettlement in St. Cloud and in Minnesota in general?
Yeah, let me tell you, Minnesota has been the epicenter of basically the Somali resettlement in the United States. Although I have to say, I looked up some numbers today, and your listeners should know that you get Somalis in New Hampshire as well, but they probably already know that. Minnesota was, years ago, the resettlement agencies, Catholic Charities, Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, and World Relief discovered Minnesota. We're talking 25 years ago. And part of the interest in resettling Somalis there was that the welfare in Minnesota is so good. So first they went to Minneapolis, and then, of course, one of the things that Minnesota has plenty of are meat processing plants, like poultry plants, turkey plants, and that sort of thing. And they're looking for that cheap refugee labor. So St. Cloud area has some of those types of employment opportunities. And so the Somalis started going there. And once they started going there as so-called secondary migrants, then Lutheran Social Services of Minnesota opened a direct resettlement office to St. Cloud. So the city has been getting refugees for a number of years now directly from Africa.
Is Minnesota like, is it a Wilson Fish state?
No, it is not.
Okay.
No, it's surprisingly, no, it is not.
Okay, for our listeners, if you don't know what that is, I highly recommend you go to refugeeresettlementwatch.wordpress.com and look it up. But what it basically means is that the federal government and the agencies that are getting paid by the federal government don't really include local government in any of this, and they just sort of drop them off. And congratulations, you have all these technically quote-unquote children to take care of. All right, so the other terrorism from last weekend was in and around New Jersey, and a gentleman named Ahmad Khan Rahami was connected to roughly 10 explosive devices, and one of which injured 29 people. Now, Business Insider reported a few days ago that his family sought asylum in the U.S. as political refugees. Is that correct?
That's what I'm hearing. The story could have changed in the last 24 hours, but that's what I was hearing as of yesterday. And your listeners should know that the Refugee Act includes both the regular refugees, which are for example, the Somalis that we bring here directly, and then it includes a provision for asylum seekers. And asylum seekers are people who got into the United States in one of many ways. They could have come in on a tourist visa and overstayed the visa. They could come illegally across the southern border, and then they apply for asylum. They claim that they are would be persecuted if they were forced to go home. And it's becoming an increasingly big chunk of the refugee flow into the United States are what's called asylum seekers. And those who are granted asylum are then called asylees. They get all the same benefits that regular refugees get, which is all the welfare benefits, once they have been asylum has been approved.
Now, Homeland Security, I think it was Homeland, recently admitted two things. It might have been some division of Homeland, I'm not quite sure. But in recent days, they admitted that, yes, ISIS is trying to insert jihadis in the refugee population, and second, that it's actually really easy to commit refugee fraud and basically fake your way in. And now the Obama administration has said that it wants to bring in another 110,000 refugees beginning October 1st of this year, 20 to 30,000 of whom are likely to be Syrian. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, we were expecting it, that Obama asked for that in his final determination. In September of each year, the president is, by law, submits to Congress his determination for how many and where they'll come from for the next year. But here's the thing that people have to understand, because we have this tendency to want to bash Obama. Not that I'm not saying he doesn't deserve being bashed, but in this case, Congress has the final say, because Congress will fund his proposal or not. These contractors that I keep talking about, whether it's Catholic Charities or Lutheran Social Services or whatever, they don't have money of their own to spend on this. They can't place refugees in your town or my town without the federal funding for it. And so Congress will be appropriating the money or not in the next few months.
And you just posted something on Refugee Resettlement Watch .com, about this, about Congress re-upping this whole program.
Congress is shameful. This whole business that we get to every year at this time where they haven't finished their budget work, this is new. Congress didn't used to operate this way. Years ago, they operated normally where they got their budget work done, but we always get to the crunch at this time of year. They want to go home right now, and they want to campaign, so they want to get out of there. They haven't finished the budget, so they'll do what's called a continuing resolution. And the continuing resolution becomes a Christmas tree for all sorts of other things that they want to get done. So now they're going to do this. We are pushing for them to defund the refugee program on this continuing resolution. Of course, that's a pipe dream. They're not going to do that. Paul Ryan is a big pro-immigration guy. So is Mitch McConnell. But so it's very frustrating. Nobody hardly wants to stand up for what's right in this case, and they want to blame Obama for it all.
I hear this from time to time from different corners, that the federal government and the refugee agencies are targeting specific towns or states for a majority of these resettled refugees.
I'll tell you, I hear that occasionally too. There's they're targeting in the sense that they are looking for, as a matter of fact, I'm going to write a post about this tomorrow because I found a great article about what they're looking for in towns. What they're looking for example, in a generic way, they're looking for towns that are run by Democrats. They're looking for towns that have a mosque in them, for example. They're looking for college towns because they tend to have a lot of students who are going to go along with this whole idea. But otherwise, there are some people who believe that they are, in fact, targeting certain political districts. St. Cloud was Michelle Bachmann's district, and Michelle Bachmann is now out of Congress. I'm not saying they had enough Somali votes to put her out of Congress or to discourage her from running again. But, in fact, that was her district. Likewise, they're pouring them into Trey Gowdy's district now in Spartanburg, South Carolina. But Gowdy could be doing something about it, and he isn't doing much. So it'd be real hard to sort of try to figure out exactly what their political motives might be in placing them in certain places.
There's no constitutional power to use taxpayer dollars for resettlement. So what do the politicians and bureaucrats use as an excuse to spend, billions annually on resettlement agencies?
Well, it's billions now. Yes, it's billions. We're talking billions. I mean, right now we're talking for the Office of Refugee Resettlement alone, $2 billion. Then the State Department will be another $1 billion. And that's not even counting all the welfare and educating the kids on the local level. The costs to your local community for educating the kids, for their medical care, for all of that. Those billion-dollar numbers don't even begin to take that money into account. The bottom line is this program, in my view, has gotten along for decades because they have created this aura of that this is what Americans do. We bring the third world in and we welcome into our towns. The average person has no clue. I'm telling you, the average person has no clue that Catholic charities or the bishops, for example, are getting $60, $70 million a year for this program of taxpayer money. Yeah, no, it's just the public doesn't understand.
From speaking to Jim Simpson and yourself and past interviews, I know that communities that put up a serious challenge have a better chance of stopping resettlements that they're not interested in. Is that effective? Do we have examples of where it's been effective? And what do people need to do to learn more about how to be effective at that if that's what they want to do?
Well, I'll tell you what. When I first got involved in this 9 years ago, we stopped at where I live, which is in Western Maryland. I'm not sure exactly what we did, except we asked a lot of questions then, and we demanded that the State Department and others answer exactly what they were doing here. Questions that every normal person would want to know is where are these refugees going to work, who's paying for all of this, and so on and so forth. And they closed the program here. I'm thinking they thought they were just going to shut down this one controversial spot. They are not stopping in places like Rutland, Vermont, which you probably know something about up there in New England. The folks in Rutland are very organized in asking about this program and pushing back against it. And so far, they have not succeeded. Now, I think there's a chance that they will. The people in Missoula, Montana, some people in Missoula, Montana pushed really hard and were not successful in stopping the program. The first refugees are arriving in Missoula. And I read the other day, that the State Department has chosen 47 new towns for refugee resettlement. So there are a lot of places in the United States that don't know yet that they're going to be the next have a resettlement site in their town.
Okay, last question. Are any states or governors fighting back against this federal overreach, basically?
Well, you have some governors like the governor of, well, I have to laugh. New Jersey, Christie got out of the program or withdrew New Jersey from the program. The governor of Kansas, Republican, withdrew Kansas a few months ago. But the bottom line is then they become basically Wilson Fish states, and there'll be some private nonprofit group will be assigned to resettle them and not have the state government will be cut out of the process. So I don't know if they've helped themselves or not. Tennessee is fighting back. They've got a lawsuit ready to go, but they are Wilson Fish state and they have a lawsuit ready to go. I hope they get it filed soon. It's a 10th Amendment lawsuit. And it could possibly be successful there. The Texas governor just this week has said that they're pulling Texas out of the program. Hey, do you want to just hear a little bit about New Hampshire? Do you have another minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I looked up where what refugees you're getting, and maybe you already know. Mm-hmm. Concord's gotten 8 Syrians so far. Over the years, the last 10 years or so, you've resettled 643 Somalis there. The largest number are from Bhutan. And right now, it looks like they're focusing their energies, when I say they, the contractors, on Concord, as opposed to Manchester. So Concord seems to be the lead city there now getting refugees.
Well, Ann, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me this evening.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, we'll have to have you again on soon. You have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This is a coalition of New Hampshire taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Hello, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm lovely. How are you?
Good, good. So, you are at the Second Amendment Foundation Gun Rights Policy Conference in lovely Tampa, Florida.
Hot Tampa, Florida.
I bet it is this time of year, in August, September, and we used to go down there, and it was like October, November before it was more comfortable. So, it's a little on the sticky side.
Just a little bit.
But hey, you're at a 2016 Gun Rights Policy Conference.
It is the 31st annual Gun Rights Policy Conference. This is my third now that I've been to. It's put on by the Second Amendment Foundation and the Citizens to Keep and Bear Arms, and it is actually a free event. Other than, of course, if you fly in, you pay for that and whatever. But the event is free, and it's basically hardcore Second Amendment activists who not only fight for Second Amendment rights in their state local legislatures, but they also, I'm finding a lot of people, if probably not a majority, also train, and they're instructors. So they practice what they preach. So it's really interesting. And I don't know if you saw earlier, I posted a photo of research books, actual books, a pile of books that they provide, and they give new books every year about cases that have happened, different writings that have been out, done over the year about new legislation, etc. And they give those away for free to everyone that comes. And today, John Lott spoke. He has a new book out called The War on Guns. He spoke today, and of course he's like the statistical genius, right? In all of any kind of, when it comes to crime statistics or gun statistics, whatever. And he spoke, and he was the one of the big speakers of the day today.
So is there any particular focus on specific issues or things that are going on, or?
Well, no, they have an agenda. There's lawyers that are fighting for certain cases that come up and talk about what happened with cases during the year, what happened with their specific cases. The Second Amendment Foundation was involved in the Heller case, so that's always a big one. And then there's other cases that we never hear about, other than we hear about them here. There's one I'm looking into, Schrader versus the Department of Justice, and I'm trying to find out more information on that. That's another case that the Second Amendment Foundation is working on, where they tried to get a gentleman, they won his rights back because, as you know, on Form 4473, which is to, when you fill out the application to purchase a firearm, if you had a misdemeanor in your state, but that misdemeanor carried a penalty of over a year, the feds consider it a felony. Even if it was for something stupid like writing a bad check and you did it 20 years ago, you're a prohibited person. So this is a big case, and I'm trying to find out more details and information on it, because this could have really huge effects on giving back people who lost their Second Amendment rights for non-violent, non-gun-related crime that they didn't even maybe serve time for. You know what I mean? It's huge. It's huge. That's one of the reasons I hate the Brady Bill and I hate the NICS, because they're taking away rights from people who committed, maybe they committed a crime, but it was non-related to violence or anything gun-related. They maybe only got a slap on the hand, a slap on the wrist, but they're prohibited people from protecting themselves even 20 years later.
Yeah, that stinks.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
Well, we've seen, you guys have been on the top of this whole, trying to get constitutional carry in New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And of course, we've had people like Michelle Lavelle who've run into resistance for no reason whatsoever, just because a local police chief kind of felt like it. To have a situation like that where you have a misdemeanor offense. I mean, I've had a misdemeanor offense in my past. It was criminal mischief, I believe they called it. And,
really?
Oh yeah. Well, I let the air out of somebody's tires.
Oh, that's funny.
And that was it. And they thought they had flat tires, and they didn't. And I still got charged for that. So
wow.
I learned a lesson at a young age. Don't do that. But something as simple as a misdemeanor, that's a Class B misdemeanor. It's not. There's a fine associated with it, but it's like it's a traffic ticket.
Right.
Really. That's what it is. So you can imagine getting something like a traffic ticket and then never being able to defend yourself with a firearm for the rest of your life. That's absurd.
Right. Yeah, it's horrifying. It's honestly horrifying, because I know multiple people who that's happened to, and there's nothing they can do about it. There really is nothing they can do about it. So what's happening is they're trying to make it so that there is something they can do about it.
Well, that'd be good. So, any other specific focuses? I know there's a lot of different things that go on. Of course, you have cities trying to ban guns. You have, there's always talk about stupid things like smart guns, anything like that.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that someone brought up is that the gun control crowd just keeps trying to push the same useless laws over and over and over again. And I want to think it was Alexander Rubian. He's from the New Jersey Second Amendment Society. And he said that he noticed the legislators were passing bills that were already law. Like, they don't even know what the law is, right? And then they want to pass new legislation just to say they're doing something about gun control.
I was going to say, we've had Alexander on the radio show.
Yes, he's fabulous.
NJ2AS.
He's fabulous.
Yeah, they were good guys. Okay, so I believe you have a reception this evening, correct?
Yes.
Half a day tomorrow?
Half a day tomorrow. More topics for discussion. Masad Ayub will be speaking tomorrow. I'll also be interviewing him. Another interesting thing today, I should say, it's been a long day. A man from Detroit spoke, and he talked about how he started, and it got his right to carry a firearm, and how he developed from, not being a firearm owner, protecting himself, to being one. And then he told the story about how one day, it was several years ago, he randomly put on his Facebook status, any woman who wants to be trained in a firearm, show up at the range on this day, everything will be provided for you. 50 women showed up.
Wow. He
does it annually every year now. This year, 417 women showed up.
Great. I just posted something on Facebook about, I guess, the number of women buying firearms is skyrocketed. And, of course, women, it said, are most likely to just own a single handgun. And I'm like, well, as long as they own at least a single handgun and learn how to shoot the thing, that is what we want.
Well, and that's huge. And there's another story, Nikki Gosser, I'm probably saying her name wrong. She wrote a story called Denied a Chance. And it's about, she was being stalked by someone. And she was married. She was being stalked by someone. And unfortunately, her husband was a DJ. They used to do karaoke at a bar, restaurant. And they were doing their usual show one night. And they weren't, she had to keep her firearm in the glove box of her car locked up because she wasn't allowed to bring it in the restaurant or the bar because of the laws. And her stalker went in there and killed her husband.
Any of those stories that we never hear about because the press doesn't want to report them. And I know there's places that do now. We have all of these resources where we could go and look, but we're the only people who are looking at that stuff. It's not, and we're trying to share it, but majority of people still see the stupid media and they don't realize, well, here's a great example. The guy in the mall goes after people with a knife, asking them what religion they are, singing Allahu Akbar, and a NRA gun guy who happens to train people is the only one in the mall with a weapon because it's a gun-free zone, and he shoots and kills this son of a bitch.
Yep.
And that's the closest we get to people going, oh, look, that guy had a gun in a gun-free zone, and he saved people's lives.
Right. But the gun control crowd, they'd still rather focus on putting more gun control into place, even though it's been a complete and utter failure everywhere. And, John Lott, when he spoke, said gun control affects those who are the most vulnerable the most. Poor minorities in crime-ridden areas, women, and the elderly. Because if it's gun control in many of these places or in many cities is made difficult for women, for these people to get firearms, or it's extremely expensive, right? I mean, it's bad enough you're buying a firearm, right? And we all know those can be range and price. But then on top of it, you have to do, some places you have to do all kinds of training, you have to do all kinds of application fees, you have to do all kinds of things just to practice your fundamental right to self-defense. And it statistically hurts minorities, women, and the elderly the most of anyone. The people that the left says they want to protect and they want to, they're advocates for, they're hurting the most.
All right, well, I'm not going to keep you from your reception any longer. Thank you so much, Kimberly Morin, for joining us from the Second Amendment Foundation's Gun Rights Policy Conference in Tampa, Florida.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Steve.
All right, you have a great night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So,
all right,
yeah,
Mike
I
Rogers.
think so.
Let's have a conversation. What do you got for me?
Aside from the epic trolling last night of of Hillary by the Trump campaign, I thought it was incredible that she would try to irritate him by bringing the obnoxious Mark Cuban as one of her front row guests. And lo and behold, and I suspect there was some collusion there in the background, Trump says, well, I'm going to invite Jennifer Flowers, and she immediately tweets back, I'm in your corner, Donald, kiss. So I think that was a big setup, and I think Hillary got master trolled there by the Trump campaign.
Well,
I see that Pence,
so.
I see that Pence is out there on the Sunday show saying, no, she's not really going to come.
Well,
no,
I think it would be great if they were all there, just kind of sitting in the front somewhere.
Yeah, Kathleen Willey, what a wonderful name. Juanita Broderick, Lewinsky, sucking on a Cuban, whatever,
The whole list of them. Just bring them all in and have them all sitting up there. Everybody, all those so-called bimbos.
Well, actually, what I saw from some of the commentary out on the web is people thought that a far better idea would be to bring some of the Benghazi moms and dads and have them sitting there silently accusing Clinton from the front row.
They'll bring them too. Not one or the other, both.
Yeah, so it'll be really interesting to see whether Donald has got something up his sleeve that he's not talking about. I mean, it's hard to imagine Trump having something that he doesn't talk about beforehand, but yeah, it's possible. It's possible. He is, after all, a showman, and I think Hillary's terrified because she doesn't know how this is going to play out.
If there's been a narrative, it's that there isn't one. Trump is doing things differently from the way the consultants would have him do it, or the pundits, or the leaders of major periodicals. They all want him to behave a certain way, and he absolutely refuses, and he's been successful doing it his way, so there's no reason for him to stop.
Yeah. By the way, it must have hurt. Did you watch Close Up this week? Jennifer Horn versus Buckles on who's got the better slate of candidates?
Well, you can fill us in if you saw it.
It was pretty good. I mean, Buckles is lying about the experience of his candidates and how they're going to sweep the field and how Hillary at the top of the slate's going to be good for him and all that stuff. And Jennifer trying to say what a great voting record Ayotte's got. To her credit, she expects Trump to do just fine, and she wasn't going to get caught saying any bad words against him. Although I think, thinking of post-primary, I did hear that somebody asked Ayotte if she'd revised her opinion that Frank Ginter should resign, and she said she had not. I think if Kelly loses, part of what it will be is the fact that she's not willing to embrace the people's choice. She wasn't willing to embrace the people's choice of policies. She's not willing to embrace the fact that the people have decided that they'd rather have Frank Ginter than be told who to vote for. And she can't bring herself to embrace Donald Trump. And, it's kind of curious in the primaries, the candidates that were perfectly happy to embrace Donald Trump tended to punch above their weight in the primary voting.
I think Kelly's problem is that her advisors and people in the Senate that she listens to have all told her, and I imagine that this is a lot like the situation was with Bill O'Brien. She thinks, or somebody has told her, that the whatever luggage these other people have, that she's going to have to carry it in her race. I just think that's what she's doing.
And I think it'll actually reduce her safety margin, not increase it. But, be that as it may, she's slightly more friendly to us for things like Supreme Court nominees than, say, Hassan would be. The state has the difficult decision, or the voters have a difficult decision. Do they gin up enough enthusiasm for Ayotte over Hassan, or if a handful of them stay home, do they let Hassan go on down and damage the Republican majority? There's no good answer, because we don't really want Kelly in there, but we even more fervently don't want Hassan in there. And then there's Sununu versus Van Osten. Buckles was mercilessly cruel in pointing out that the number of customers at Waterville has gone down to about half since Chris got the property.
Wait, does that mean let's analyze that? That means that if he's the governor, we could expect half as many people at the government trough? That would be awesome.
Wouldn't that just be nice if
That's
that
not how
happened?
it's going to work. And of course, I could see why Ray Buckley would be against that, because he wants more people at the trough, and Chris is clearly a threat to that. Not much of a threat, if you ask me, but he kind of is, and they wouldn't have power for the first time in the corner office since 2004, 2005, something like that.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah, 18 out of the last 20 years have been Democrat or something. Jennifer parried that one quite well, too, pointing out the thinness of Van Osten's business experience and how he was basically given an easy job at Stonyfield just so that he could say he'd got business experience. Again, choices, not very good ones, but even with the last name that's been around New Hampshire politics for too long, I'd still rather have Chris Sununu in the corner office than Colin Van Osten.
I will sadly take any Republican governor over any Democrat governor at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So, what
were you loading up while we were waiting? What do you got for me?
Well, so I've been looking at some of the background. There's a lot of parallels between what's happening with Trump this year, where everybody's shying away from him, or everybody that's in the establishment is shying away from him, and what happened to Goldwater. Goldwater was kind of outspoken. He said a couple of things early on the campaign trail that clearly weren't his philosophy. Interestingly, his foreign policy philosophy is remarkably similar to Trump's, in as much as he wanted the military to be bulked up and the foreign entanglements to be minimized. He was thoroughly against getting involved in Vietnam just before, Kennedy, Johnson got us totally embroiled there. And then, of course, Nixon got to inherit that. And it wasn't a very clean exit. But that's one thing I'm not going to blame Nixon for, because the Democrats basically sabotaged the war effort.
Leaving him with funding it?
Yeah. Leaving him with nothing to do really but to try and get out with some sort of grace before it collapsed. It was a real mess. But I discovered some interesting things. It turns out that the elder statesman that might be voting for Hillary was a Goldwater guy in his youth, as was, of course, Hillary herself, a Goldwater gal. Yes, H.W. was a pretty severe conservative when he first got into politics and into Congress, and was a supporter of Goldwater, whereas Romney Sr., Rockefeller Sr., and Scranton were all, they were the bigwigs of the day in the Republican Party, were all fervently against Goldwater. So when Goldwater won the nomination, these people wouldn't do anything to help, and pretty much let it be known they didn't feel he should be trusted with the nuclear buttons. Where have you heard that recently? It just sounds so similar. And what I want to remind people is, if you want to be strict, puritanical, ideological, Goldwater was far more conservative than Trump. I'm not trying to paint Trump as the perfect ideological conservative. What I'm saying is he's what we've got. He has put forth now 2 lists of potential Supreme Court justices, all way, way better than anything a Democrat would propose, even right up there with justices that Ted Cruz might propose. He has got a tax plan that makes some sort of sense, and give or take possible entitlement with for child credit. I don't think that there's that much wrong with his proposals. And so, we've got that versus another big government liberal. And what we have to remember is that by contributing to the defeat of Goldwater, the Republican Party and its mostly liberal / neocon bigwigs, the ones that never saw a war they didn't like to fund, and were perfectly happy to go along with the Democrats' expansion of government, those same people effectively enabled the Vietnam War and the Great Society and the war on poverty that Lyndon Johnson brought us. And, looking ahead, moving ahead 50 years, just look what a mess we have now as a result of those policies. And let us not forget Goldwater's most ardent supporter, Oh, and by the way, Nixon was in Goldwater's camp too, which turned out to be, I think, fortuitous 4 years later. But the most ardent supporter, the man whose broadcasts from 1964 are still replayed today, was Ronald Reagan. The time for choosing speech that he delivered during the closing phases of the 1964 campaign was one of the most impassioned cries against distant and tyrannical government, against government programs sapping the will of the people to fend for themselves. It was magnificent. It basically foretold the way Medicare and Medicaid would balloon on us, and they did.
I wonder how Goldwater would have done if he had Facebook and Twitter and social media and the internet. You have to wonder, given the contrasts, because most of Trump's support is hidden by the media. People who don't really watch anything other than ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and maybe MSNBC don't know. I mean, they may hear rumors from people in social media that Trump has these huge turnouts and he has all these people who didn't used to be registered voters who have come back because they're excited about the possibility of voting for somebody who isn't one of those rhinos or one of those Democrats. And it's a different day. It's a different age. So, I mean, while there are very obviously similarities, and of course, I don't think Trump could ever be as conservative as Goldwater, you have to wonder how it would have been different if he had had the same open media experience that we have today.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And, you know, I've generally been somewhat of a war hawk. I certainly like to stamp out trouble spots. But all these little conflagrations around the world that we get ourselves into, indeed, we even create in some cases, that there's no need for us to be involved in. You know, the various Crapistans of the Middle East are going to still be just the same in 20 or 30 years as they are now. You know, the names in the government buildings will have changed. The people in the political prisons will have changed. But essentially, it'll still be a hellhole, you know, unless they embrace Christianity or something. But without Rush Limbaugh and Ann Coulter as president and VP, that's not going to happen.
I don't even know if they would do it, but I mean,
you know, as in invade their countries, convert them to, you know, replace their leaders and convert them to Christianity.
I mean, there is something to be said for carpet bombing. You know, carpet bombing was effective. It demoralized the populace. It destroyed infrastructure. It made life miserable for the people who were propping up whoever it was that was being a nuisance. And I'm not saying we should return to that. I think smart bombs are great. You know, you get good video and everything. But, you know, if you don't hurt your enemy, they're never going to stop.
No, that's true. But, you know, we don't need to get into every little conflagration everywhere. Bashar Assad is horrid, but he wasn't persecuting Christians the way ISIS is. You know,
Libya wasn't the disaster it is now with Gaddafi.
Libya wasn't the same disaster. The foreign oil companies were making a profit there to the mutual benefit of themselves and the government of Libya. And having had the demonstration of what could happen to you if you ticked off Uncle Sam, courtesy of the deposition of Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi wasn't going to bother anybody. So, you know, we picked a fight we didn't need to pick. And, you know, same thing in Egypt.
I was going to say, yeah.
We pushed to remove a perfectly good president of military sponsorship, yes, who at least was stabilizing the country and stamping out the Muslim Brotherhood. And we pushed to replace him with a president elected by the Muslim Brotherhood.
Well,
and that
after
didn't work.
Seeing Trevor's movie, we know why.
Well, we do know why. Not only are too many congressmen and senators bought and paid for by some combination of the Communist Party USA and front organizations for the Muslim Brotherhood, but let us not forget that the current, and if we're not careful, the future president, are owned and operated by the Muslim Brotherhood. You know, Valerie Jarrett has connections back to Iran, and you know, family connections to Muslim Brotherhood.
Don't forget
Huma Abedin or Huma Danger or Huma Wiener or whatever she chooses to be, since she's no doubt separating from the never mind, words fail me, from Anthony.
Pretty good.
Yes. She has connections to the Muslim Brotherhood, and her mother has connections to the Muslim Brotherhood. How can this not be bad for the country? And how can it not be, frankly, treason for our high officials to employ these people as their top advisors? It just boggles the mind. So, you wonder why we pushed to topple the regime in Egypt and to allow the Muslim Brotherhood to take over. And then you look around and you find, well, the Muslim Brotherhood's got a pretty big presence very close to the center of power. We gave them their chance. Fortunately for most of Egypt, they blew it, and General Sisi seems to be at least a Islamic reformer, if not a thoroughgoing nice guy all around.
Well, he's certainly a stabilizing force. He has made it more difficult for terrorism to take over, basically, the land that is Egypt. And, of course, that's not what happened in Libya. Libya is a mess, and now we've got Syria is a mess, and chunks of Iraq are a mess. And they weren't a mess when George Bush left office and Obama came in, so we need to do our part, and maybe this is it, a little bit of audio, to make sure that legacy doesn't go away.
I think the message has to be basically threefold. To Putin, you take care of Assad and help drive ISIS out of Syria. We'll support the Kurds and drive ISIS out of northern Iraq. And to Turkey, you lay a finger on either of those buddies, and you're gone.
I'm sure Erdogan would love to hear that. So.
He needs to hear that, and we need to do something to shore up our base at Incirlik, where we can very quickly either disable or detonate any nukes that are still there, and get all the people out in a hurry. And we need to give them the same message, which I believe we should have long ago given Afghanistan and Pakistan. When it comes time for us to leave, we will get unhindered passage, or we will scorch the earth all the way to the coast. Capisce?
Yeah. Well, again, carpet bombing, right? I mean, it's the same basic concept without the airplanes.
Yeah. I mean, basically, at some point you got to get out of these places. You got to get out without having yourselves, having a Vietnam, Saigon embassy moment.
Right. Helicopter people going, take me, and they can't. So.
Well, not even being able to take all of our own people.
Correct.
You have to make it clear. Don't mess with us. We're leaving. We're going to leave you alone, but don't you dare get in the way. And in most cases that'll work.
All right, we got about a minute. What do you want to wrap up?
And by the way, I read a piece today that I thought was pretty fascinating. Some of the senior politicians in Europe are actually rooting for the success of Trump, whatever they say publicly.
That's interesting.
Then you won't be able to push us around. We'll set up our own defense forces, and it'll be a glorious new day for Europe, if it doesn't implode, of course.
If it isn't overcome by refugees.
I also read today that Merkel is thinking of slamming on the brakes, that perhaps her popularity has plummeted too much. I think she's too late.
I think you're right. I think she's done. All right, and so are we. So I want to thank you so much for being available on short notice, and you have a great night.
All right. Now back to being a revolutionary bum, maybe planting some different signs in the yard. Got to keep the neighbors entertained.
That's right. I got to keep them on their toes.
All right, Steve. Thanks.
All right, we'll see ya.
Bye.
Night. All right, that wraps up this week's program. A little bit sooner than the normal 60 minutes, but then again, we don't have any ads, we don't have any promos, we don't have any bumpers, we don't have any stingers, we don't even have a name for this thing yet. So we're going to keep working on that, but until then, we'll keep bringing you guests like Mike Rogers and Kimberly Morin. And I'd like to thank John Zmirack and, of course, Ann Corcoran for spending time with us. Everybody that's been on the program, thanks so much. We'll talk to you again next week.